Good day. Can anyone hear me? Please just use the chat to indicate that you can actually hear me. Good day. Okay. Just find the chat. Okay, great. Okay. I'm going to get started. Hopefully everyone is doing well. I think the session has started. But I think where we are going to start today is just more on the recap. So we're going to start with the recap from what we learned yesterday, just in case we've got new people that are actually joining. So just as a recap, hopefully everyone can hear me, right? Just as a recap, yesterday we looked at the first domain, which was on cloud concepts. So we looked at what exactly is cloud computing. We looked at the shared responsibility model, and we looked at defining what is a public, private, and a hybrid cloud. And we also looked at the different use cases, and I think understanding the different use cases is really important, especially during the exam, because they actually do test you on your ability to identify the best solution based on whatever question that you're facing. We looked at the consumption-based model, we looked at comparing prices, we looked at serverless computing. And I think a big part that we also covered is the virtual machines. I think that's probably domain 2. And also understanding the different benefits of cloud computing, like high availability, reliability, security, and governance, right? Those are some of the things that are important for that domain. And also cloud service types, which is understanding what is infrastructure as a service, what is platform as a service, what is software as a service. All of those are very important to understand as you prepare for the exam, right? So where we left off yesterday, so yesterday we were then speaking about the core architecture. So we looked at what is a region, right? Remember, a region is a piece of land that basically has got multiple availability zones, and an availability zone is basically a group of data centers that are located close to each other, right? That piece of land that has got multiple availability zones is then called a region. Then you got region pairs. These are basically different regions that could be paired with each other in the event that something actually happens and all of that. You know that you've got backup from another region, but that's a very extreme case, because normally it's very expensive to replicate your data over a region, but it is an option that organizations or companies normally do have, right? We looked at sovereign regions. So when we talk about sovereign region, this is where we speak about dedicated regions for the government, right? Because there are certain regions that America would not want to have their data centers because of certain security risks or possibility of them being hacked or anything like that. So I'd say that's another thing that's very important. And we covered availability zone, resource groups, and understanding the difference between a resource and a resource group, which basically groups all of your resources and stuff like that. So I think from yesterday, I think that's what we basically covered. I think that's where we ended. I think today we're going to continue. I think we also covered compute. So we covered what are virtual machines, what are containers, and what are functions. We looked at VM scale sets, availability sets. We looked at virtual desktop. But I think the one thing that we did not cover, I think from yesterday, is the security or the networking side of things, right? Like what are virtual private networks and all of that. So I think in today's session, I'm probably going to start with explaining a few concepts, but we still have to cover storage services, identity and access management and all of that. So please use the chat to just indicate whatever questions that you have. So if you do have questions, please just engage so that we can actually answer your questions to better prepare for the exam, right? So I think the other thing that's also important, we are going to cover management and governance. I know it's quite a lot that you need to know for the exam, so we might not be able to cover everything, but the way that I've picked the topics, it's basically based on what I think could potentially come out of the exam, or certain concepts that they generally love testing more than the others. So I've sort of handpicked some of the areas, so we won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully some of the questions help you understand better in terms of preparing for the exam itself, right? So we are done with this. So we did go through all of these different questions. Yesterday, we looked at the shared responsibility model. We also did a couple of questions over here. We looked at software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. So we actually did cover quite a lot, right? Let's see where we left off. Okay, so we actually did cover quite a bit. Okay, I think management groups. Okay, cool. So I think based on what we did, so yesterday we actually ended on this question. So this was the last question that we basically did yesterday. So the question was asking, which resource can you use to manage policies, can you use to manage access, policies, and compliance across multiple subscriptions, right? And the correct answer for this one, we said management groups, because if you think about the hierarchy of the Microsoft environment, the only thing that can actually manage subscriptions has to be management groups, because they are above the subscription level. So we selected that answer because management groups can be used in environments that have multiple subscriptions to streamline applications and governance, right? And when you look at the resource groups, they can only be used to organize resources, right? That's their limit. And then administrative units are used to delegate the administrative administration of intra-resources, such as the users and groups and stuff like that. But it wouldn't necessarily go to the extent of helping you with managing subscriptions. So that's why that option was actually taken out. Okay, cool. So that was the option based on what we covered yesterday. So yeah, so this is going to be the first question that we have for today, right? So the first question that we have today, and please use the chat to just indicate what you think is going to be the correct answer. And for those that might be new or attending this for the first time, I think we're going to follow the same structure. We'll look at the question, and I'm going to see, then we're going to go to whatever additional information that we need to understand the question in order for us to answer. So that's the format that I'm actually, so we are actually learning as we are basically answering the questions, right? So hopefully someone is already thinking about the solution to this question, but we will be breaking it down, right? Cool. So the first question says, your company, sorry, let me just get my drawing pen ready. I think it makes it quite easy for me to explain, unless it's not available today. It might not be available in this view. Okay, unfortunately I might not be able to use my drawing in this view, but it's fine, right? So I think the first part, maybe let me rather do this. Let me see if I can. Right, hopefully everyone can see. I'm just going to do this a bit because the presentation mode can be quite problematic. Let me see if I can get my pen. I'm going to use draw. I have got the drawing over there. Okay. Okay, it sounds like I'm not able to draw in this view. I guess I'll just escape. All right. But hopefully it's zoomed enough for everyone else. Because if I zoom out, I lose the drawing pen. So I'm just going to use this view. Hopefully everyone, it's zoomed enough for everyone. So I think looking at the first question, right? So your company has data centers, right? You need to pay attention to whatever keyword that you get. So your company has data centers in Los Angeles, New York. The company has a Microsoft Azure subscription, right? That's the first thing. So we know that the company has a Microsoft Azure subscription. You are configuring the 2 data centers as a geo clustered site for site resiliency. Okay, so we can see that we've got geo clustered, so basically meaning that it's located across different locations, clustered around different locations, right? And there could be some sort of replication, so that could mean that some of the data is actually replicated across different areas, right? So you need to recommend an Azure storage redundancy option, right? So they're trying to figure out what is the best way for us to replicate our data. But that's the other thing that I'm actually picking up from this. Then you have the following storage requirements, so, right? The data must be stored on multiple nodes. So that's the first requirement. You need to store your data on multiple nodes. Great. Then the second part is the data must be stored on nodes in separate geographic locations. So basically, you want to have that replicated to multiple locations, right? Then the other one says the data can be read from the secondary location as well as the primary location. So you want to be able to read the data from both the primary location and the secondary location, right? And then now let's look at the options that you have, right? In terms of the options that you've actually sort of been given, these are the options you have. Which of the following Azure storage redundancy options should you recommend, right? So we've got this couple of options here, and if you do not understand what each of these are actually meant for, I think you might actually find it quite difficult to, let's say, answer this particular question, right? So I would say that's the, okay, hopefully I am still live and everyone can actually hear me, right? Cool. So the only way that you might be able to answer this question, if you understand this different, let's say, redundancy options that you actually have. So I've got a slide just next here. So the slide basically says, it is a description of the different options that we've got, right? So the first one is called locally redundant, 3 copies within the same data center. Now, if you read the requirements that we have, we don't just want to store our data in the same data center. We want to store our data in multiple sort of like areas. So this first option seems okay, but it won't be able to give us an option for us to replicate data across different locations, because I think that was one of the requirements. If you go here, it actually says data must be stored on multiple nodes and in separate geographic locations, right? Cool. Then this one is eliminated for me because this local redundancy basically means you go to one data center and you create copies of your data. Now, if that data center for some reason actually disappears, you might actually find yourself with sort of like issues, because once that data center is actually gone, that means your data is literally lost. So one impacted data center, it's literally the end for all your information, right? And then the other thing that's also important to note is the second option here we've got is the zone redundant storage, so across availability zones in a region. So what this one actually does is that you can replicate your data across different availability zones. So the example that I gave, say if there's multiple data centers, let's say there's one in Sandton, one in Midrand, and there's another data center located at a different place, right? If you are able to maybe for those that might be attending outside of South Africa, these are basically cities that are cities in South Africa that I'm actually mentioning, right? So if you've got multiple data centers in different cities, that could be availability zones. And if you decide to store your data in one city, you know that you can actually replicate it to another city. So let's say you replicate your data into 3 cities, and if one of them actually is destroyed for some reason, you know that you can still get your data from another one. But the problem with this one, it's just based on an availability zone. We want our replications to be sort of like at a region level, right? So I feel like that one would be eliminated because of that. Okay, cool. Then you've got the other option, which is called the GRS, or geo-redundant storage. This one says across regions. This is good, right? This is one of the things that we want. We want to replicate our data across regions, and we've got primary and secondary. I'm happy with this one, but there is a catch with this one, right? And then if you go to the next one, which is the RA, so RA basically speaks into it's the same as this one, so meaning that you can replicate your data across regions and also primary and secondary, right? And you can also read, you can also get access to read your secondary. You can read data that's on your secondary region or whatever, right? So that's what this one basically speaks to. Now, if we, with the understanding of these requirements, we go back to the first question, we want to be able to read data from the secondary. So the one that actually ticks all of our questions would be the RAGRS, because it's this, you get to replicate your data across regions, but also you can do secondary and yeah, and be able to read your information. So the correct answer in this case for me has to be read only geo-redundant, right? Because this one allows us to do all of that. Can everyone see? Because I think there might be a delay in my screen. I'm just checking my other screens. I don't see any movement. Okay, I think maybe it could be the drawings are not appearing, because I can see that my drawings are not appearing in the presentation, and I think my screen might not be moving. Sorry, let me just quickly check what could be the problem. I think my screen was actually not I think I wasn't sharing my screen, but no one sent a comment, but it's fine. So I think what I was trying to explain, and I think no one actually saw that. So what I was trying to explain is that, so based on what we need to achieve over here, right? We can clearly see that we must be able to store multiple nodes, and we must be able to store these nodes across separate geographic regions. Now remember, the moment you hear the word separate geographic locations, this basically means your data needs to be replicated across multiple regions, right? This speaks to the regions, and so you know that whatever option that you choose, firstly, it must be able to replicate your data across multiple regions. But the other important thing is that you need to be able to read data from your secondary region, because it's great if you can read from your primary region would be, let's say, the region where you are actively, let's say, using that you're accessing your data on, because when you create copies of your data across multiple data centers, you are not always reading. So when I say reading, it means you're not always accessing the information from all of those at the same time. You choose one data center to actually access the information, and the others just remain as copies, right? So the one that you're actively using becomes your primary data center, and the one that you're just using as a replication to ensure that if something happens, you can still get your data. That one is basically a secondary, right? So what they want is to say, we want to be able to read on our primary data center, but at the same time, we want to be able to read data from the secondary, right? It's an additional feature that you would basically have to pay for if you wanted to get access to something like that, right? So what we have here, when I looked at the different options we have, so these are the different options that we have. We've got local redundancy. This one doesn't work for us because this only means that you are replicating your data locally. The second one is zonal redundancy. So this one means that you're replicating your data across multiple availability zones. It doesn't help us because we want to replicate our data on different regions. So we want a larger scale of replicating our data. Option number 3 says this one allows you to replicate your data across regions. So this one ticks one of our boxes because we do want to replicate data across multiple geographic locations. But the reason why this wouldn't be the correct answer is because it does not give you read access to your secondary region, right? But the RAGRS actually allows you to do that because it has everything that number 3 does. But on top of that, you are able to read data from your secondary region whenever you want to, right? So because of this, so these were basically the different options that we had. So if you go back to the options that are there, so if you think you know the correct answer, you can, but I think I've already highlighted the correct answer. But you can also use the chat just to indicate what you think is correct. I think it's really good for you to also practice and see how far off are you from some of the answers. So please do participate and try to guess what could be the correct answer, right? Cool. So with that said, so geo-redundancy, we know that this one actually does replicate our data across multiple regions, but we do not get read access. But this one does do geo-redundancy, but you can also get access to reading. So this is basically the RAGRS, right? Zonal redundancy out because this is just based on an availability zone. Locally redundant, this one we're also going to cancel it because we do want to replicate our data across multiple regions, right? So please let me know if the screen is not zoomed enough for anyone. Okay, cool. So that was the first question that you might actually get in the exam. So in the exam, they might actually test you on multiple things, right? If someone wants to only replicate their data in the same data center and they do not want to incur any expenses, they might go for this one. So these others, so number 1 is the cheapest option. Number 2 is the second cheapest option. Number 3 is the third cheapest option. And number 4 is actually the most expensive of them all because being able to replicate your data across regions and also plus getting read access requires you to actually pay much more money to be able to actually do that. So hopefully everyone understands this one. But in the exam, just be careful because they might test you differently, trying to see if you understand which one is cheaper, which one is best based on the sort of requirement, right? So that's how they do these exams. They try to see if you know when to apply a certain concept in certain instances. So that's how I'd say the exam is actually done, and that's one way you can sort of survive the exam, honestly. Okay, cool. So there is an explanation here saying that the RA meets all the 3 requirements, data is stored, and then there's a further explanation. I will be sharing the slides, I'll just make them available, but I'm probably going to add it onto the description of day 2 of this exam prep session, right? Cool. So that was that with the question. So the next question, okay, cool. So the next question basically says, okay, this is one of those yes/no questions. They are also very common as you work through the exam, right? So the question says, the question is included in a number of questions that depict the identical setup. However, every question has a distinctive result. Establish if. So it's one of, they always give you this instruction before you actually start. So it's one of those yes or no questions where they sort of give you a solution and they want to see if you are able to say the solution is correct or not correct, right? So you'll see that the exam is very much application based. So they want to see if you're able to apply your understanding of the different services, of the different tools. So when you are studying the exam, you need to ask yourself, do you know when to use the particular service? Do you know when it's best for you to change a service, right? So that's the core thing that you must be able to do during the exam, and that's what they basically test you on, right? So if we look at this question over here, right, it says you are tasked with deploying Azure virtual machines, right? Okay, we see that we are deploying Azure virtual machines for your company, right? You need to make use of the appropriate cloud model deployment. Now, let's stop over here. Firstly, they're talking about cloud model deployment. So what are cloud model deployment, right? they're probably talking about software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, right? Those are the different options that you basically have from those. Now, the question specifically says virtual machines. Now, if you guys remember from yesterday's class, we actually spoke about what virtual machines are. So virtual machines actually virtualize the hardware side of things, right? Because virtual machines virtualize the hardware. So I think I did some small diagram. Hopefully I can do it here. So this would be HD, right? This would be your hardware. And then you would have operating system. I'm gonna call this OS. And then from here, you got your applications, right? I'm just gonna say app. Please, if you think you know the correct answer, please just use the chat. Is it a yes? Is it a no? And we will break it down. There's no wrong or right answer. I think we're all here to learn. So please feel free to participate and just say whatever answer that you think is correct, right? And it also helps me to know that actually there are people that are actually watching this live, because yeah, I think it's very tricky with YouTube. Okay, cool. I'm just going to say application, right? So if you think about virtual machines, what do virtual machines do? Virtual machines, they virtualize the hardware, right? Because they go all the way to virtualizing the hardware, that means if you are using a virtual machine, you've got control to some extent over the hardware, right? If it's, what is the other one? If it's a container, right? Remember, containers sort of virtualize the operating system level to some extent, right? So you need to understand that virtual machines to some extent are infrastructure as a service, because infrastructure as a service means you go all the way to getting access to the underlying infrastructure itself, right? So we know that whenever someone speaks about virtual machines, it's always going to be infrastructure as a service. In the exam, anything that has to do with virtual machines, just know that it has to do with infrastructure as a service. So with that understanding, if we read this, they say you are tasked with deploying Azure virtual machines for your company, right? You need to make use of the appropriate cloud deployment model, right? I see someone has already said no. I like that answer. Then the solution here, so this is the solution that they're actually proposing. That's the problem, and they're proposing a solution for you, right? And they're saying you should make use of software as a service. This is an automatic no, because software as a service does not deploy virtual machines, right? For virtual machines, it's basically infrastructure as a service. So I would say, does the solution meet the requirement? Definitely no, but that is basically the solution, right? So I think this is some of the very popular questions you might be asked during the exam. Any questions on this one, or anyone who does not understand how I got that answer? Right. If you see there's further descriptions or information here that says that the correct answer is no, right? The appropriate cloud deployment model solution is basically for Azure virtual machines would be infrastructure as a service, right? With infrastructure as a service, you can provision and manage virtual machines, storage, networking resources in the cloud while maintaining control of operating system and deploying applications, right? So fundamentally, it was very clear that the key word was virtual machines. So if you did not understand what a virtual machine is, you would have not gotten the answer correct, right? So that one was really testing you on your understanding of what virtual machines are, right? Hopefully we can get more engagement in the chat as we go forward. All right, cool. Now, this is another one that I feel like a lot of people might not be prepared to answer, because it's one of those trick questions that are not explicitly covered in the content itself, and you might not be aware that, this is another one that you need to cover. So this one, please pay attention to it, because it's a very popular type of question. It might be worded out differently, but this is another very popular question that they generally love asking during the exam, right? So the question says, your developer has created 10 websites, web applications, right? This is our first keyword. 10 web applications, right? So we've got that. That must be hosted. I think it should have been hosted. That must be hosted on Azure, right? We've got 10 web applications that must be hosted on Azure. So this is basically looking at the hosting services that Azure actually offers, right? So it's very important to understand where the question actually is coming from. You need to determine which Azure web tier plan to host the web applications, right? If you think you know the answer, you can already sort of give me the answer. The web tier plan must meet the following requirements. So this is where the important concepts actually come in. The web app will use a custom domain. So whatever plan that you're going to choose here, you need to ask yourself, are we able to use a custom domain? That's the first thing. The web apps each require a 10 gigabyte of storage, right? So that's the first thing. Any service that does not meet this, we eliminate it immediately, right? The web apps must each run in a dedicated compute instance, right? Another requirement. The load balancing between instances must be included, so you want to have load balancing as a feature. The cost must be minimized. Okay, now this is a very interesting one, right? So I'm just going to go to the solution, right? And I sort of debate with the solution to some extent, but let's look at the difference. So before we go to the solution, let's understand what are those options, what do they actually mean, right? Firstly, the standard licensing supports custom domains, happy. So it actually does meet our requirements, provides 50 gig of storage per application, which is great, but quite overkill just a bit. Runs web apps on a dedicated Azure virtual machine. Okay, we've got dedicated. It includes load balancing, very important there. That's something that we really want to have, right? Load balancing. And then let's see. So then we've got B. B says support custom domains. That's what we need. Provides 10 gig per application. I think this sort of does meet our requirement, right? It does tick those two requirements that we basically need. Runs web apps on a dedicated Azure machine. Okay, that's also great. Includes load balancing. Okay, we also do need that, right? And this one also has auto scaling, right? So I'm seeing this too. Then lower cost compared to the standard tier. So this one is cheaper compared to the standard tier. Okay, we see that. The other one, this one, 10 gig, I'm just taking it out immediately. We don't have to read anything, honestly, because it's not worth our time. We are looking for 10 gig at a minimum. And then this one is also cancelled because that's also 1 gig that doesn't support. Now, the debate that we have is between these two. All right, so this is the debate that we have. Are we going to choose A or are we going to choose B? Now, the only unique difference I'm seeing here is auto scaling, right? Higher cost compared to, and this one is slightly more expensive. But here it's cheaper and includes load balancing, right? Okay, cool. So if I go back here and it says it must be cheaper, load balancing must be included, web apps each dedicated compute instances, the web app, I would go for B. I think B is the correct answer because the key word is cost must be minimized. If you took out this third point over here, then it would have been a different debate, right? But for me, what meets the requirements and we can still minimize the costing side of things would be that, right? So I feel like B would be the correct answer, right? And when I went through the solution, I didn't sort of agree with it because they say it's standard. So I think we're just going to scratch this. Don't pay attention to this one. So I think the solution here is incorrect, right? But basically what I would say, the correct one is basically that. So now, do you see how you have to break down those questions without actually panicking, right? It's really about you breaking down the questions and figuring out what would basically work better based on whatever solution that you're trying to bring. Any questions on this one? Okay, I see there is no questions. I think that is great. If we do not have any questions, okay, so far I'm seeing one person. Please, guys, do participate. I think we had much more better participation yesterday. I think it does go a long way in helping me understand if we are all on the right path or we all understand what is actually going on. All right, cool. So that's why that question, and it's all about the only downside, right, is that in the exam you don't have the, let's say, the liberty to just break down all of these questions to this extent. So the one thing that I'd say, if you are prepared for the exam, it would be easier for you to really break down the questions and actually find the solution to most of those questions. So that's one thing I'd say. But in the exam, unfortunately, we've got 45 minutes for the exam. I think last time I checked, it was 45 minutes. So that's how much time you have. But I think it's about, it could be about 30 to 45 questions. They do change. But I don't think this is much of a difficult exam. All right, cool. So with that said, I think we've dealt quite a bit with the availability zones, regions, and stuff like that. So I think now it is time for us to go to the slightly difficult part of the program, right? And I think this is where we basically start learning about the networking services. So I'm just going to see if I can switch on to presentation mode. It's just that presentation mode gives me problems. So I'm just going to have my phone over here so that I can be able to see the comments on the chat. All right, then I'll switch over to presentation mode. I'm just gonna go to day 2. Okay, I can see the comment this side. Then I'm just going to switch over to presentation mode. Right. Okay, cool. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I do have the comments on the side using my phone over here. Right, cool. So yeah, so now we're gonna jump into networking, right? I think networking is a bit difficult for a lot of people that are not in cybersecurity, honestly, especially during the exam, right? And you know, I'm also one of them. Honestly, I'm not a cybersecurity expert or anything like that, right? Cybersecurity is not really my strongest domain. I'm into the data science and whatever. But I think because I'm not from the security side, I try to simplify things as much as possible for me to be able to understand, right? Because I think some of these concepts are not so complex as we make them, but I would say one thing that helps me understand cybersecurity is I always think about it like physical security that we have, right? It might sound like it doesn't make sense, but if you think of cybersecurity as the physical security that we have in the world, you might actually start to understand some of those concepts better. Like there is so much of a relationship between the physical security work that we do and the cybersecurity work that we do. You know, like things like your firewalls, you know, it's basically a way for you to preventing people to get into like your complex or whatever and stuff like that. It's very similar or the same concepts. It's just that they're adapted for the digital world. But I always try to understand it in the sense of looking at it from a normal physical security type of thing, right? So that's how I basically get to the understanding, right? So let's look at the first one. So they do ask you about this, so it's very important for you to be able to understand, right? So what is Azure networking, right? So Azure networking services, it's a way, I think, without reading this, basically Azure networking services, this is really a way for you to protect your resources, right, from any sort of harm, from maybe people trying to attack or hack your resources, or whether from on-premises or online and stuff like that. So that's one thing that our simplest way of understanding it, right? So some of the key concepts that you need to understand for the exam, it's things like virtual networks, subnets, peering, domain name service, right? VPN, gateway, express routes, right? So I'm going to break down this. If you do have questions, please just let me know. Let me rather put this over here so that I can actually see. Hopefully it doesn't topple over my camera. Okay, cool. you can see now. So I think let's look at the first one. The first one says, what is a virtual network? I do have a diagram to just illustrate what this is, so do not panic. We will look at actual diagrams to understand what all of this actually speaks to, right? So virtual networks is basically a private network in Azure. So it's sort of like a way for you to protect your resources. It's the first line of defense to some extent. I think that's one way I would explain it. Subnets are basically segments within a virtual network, right? Peering is connecting two virtual networks. DNS is basically translating your name into an IP address. You've got virtual private gateways, secure site-to-site connection, express route. I know it doesn't make sense as we're looking at it now, but hopefully the next diagram actually does explain this a little bit better, right? So I tried to put together a diagram of my sort of understanding of how these things actually work. So hopefully we can get to a point where we understand some of the concepts over here, right? So if you guys remember from yesterday, I did explain that cloud computing basically means that instead of you having your own data center within the premises of your office, or you owning those data centers, you would rather rent out data centers from companies like Google, Microsoft, and AWS, right? So that's the whole model. It's basically you renting out all of the services from different companies or organizations, right? So on-premises would be your organizations, the data center that you have locally within your sort of premises, and in there you've got servers, workstations, databases, applications, your local network. So this is within your company, right? That's the first thing to just understand from that one, right? And then obviously your company connects to the internet, you know, that's standard, you have to connect to the internet. And then you've got the Azure cloud. So this would be your cloud provider or Azure, right, as a cloud service provider that's basically providing a service to you in terms of you using their cloud computing, right? So you'll see that the first line over here, there is basically this sort of, you can call this maybe the gate, or if you think about a complex, right, you know, there would be some sort of surrounding within a complex to sort of filter out people that get into your complex, some sort of security measures, right? So a virtual network is basically saying that a virtual private network, right? So there was a word over here about virtual network, right? So you've got a virtual network over here. So this would be your virtual network, right? It's network that you're basically accessing from another entity. So you would have your virtual networks over here, right? And then within that, if you as a company wanted to get access to the Azure cloud, you would connect to the internet, and then for you to get a connection between this, you'd have to use the VPN gateway, right? Now, if we go and read the definition of VPN gateway, where is it? So it says here, a VPN gateway is a secure site-to-site connection between your on-premises, right? It's a secure connection between your on-premises network and Azure, right? So you want to connect, so you want to connect, because your information is sitting in the cloud, right? You want to connect your on-premises, so you want to connect from here to here. So the VPN gateway is basically a secure connection for you not to be exposed from attackers, basically. So it's a safe way for you to actually connect and see your resources on Azure, right? That's basically the simplest term I can actually put it, right? The second one that we have over here is the express route. Now, the express route, I've got a definition for it also here, right? This is a dedicated private connection to Azure, right? So companies actually do have, if you've got a dedicated, it's a private connection, right? Remember, because here you're trying to go through the internet and connect to Azure, you have to go through a virtual private network gateway to create that secure connection. But now with this one, you are getting sort of like a private connection. If you're just getting a direct private connection to your cloud resources, that is called an express route, right? Hopefully that helps people understand. So far we've covered what an express route is and what a virtual private network is, right? And then you've got your Azure DNS. I think this one, the best way to understand it, honestly, it's so it says it translates your domain names into an IP address, right? For example, the website for my company is what is it? moodleacademy.com, right? HTTP, whatever. So what actually a DNS does, it converts your domain name into an IP address. So you guys know the IP address numbers, the 19 whatever, right? Those IP address numbers, I'm sure you guys have heard about them. So a DNS just translates that into an IP address, right? So that because if now imagine in the world, if everyone's website was using an IP address, it would be difficult to see, is this Takealot, is this Amazon, what company am I interacting with? But because this can actually translate your DNS into a name and still convert into an IP address, it's a much more better way for you to understand, let's say, the names of websites and all of that, right? So that's basically what a DNS actually is, right? And then the other thing, you've got a subnet. So if you look at this, subnets are basically you creating further subdivisions within your network, right? So that's one thing that I would say. Subnets are basically, so you've got this virtual network over here, right? And then subnet is basically you further creating other separations. It's good for security reasons, right? Because you're adding other more layers for accessing and all of that. So it's a really good way of segmenting your resources, right? So this is my simplest understanding or way to break down all of this information, right? And next year, I've got another slide, right, where I'm breaking down another concept, right? So hopefully this is clear for everyone. I'm just suspecting that it could be blocked by my image over here, right? So the other one I want us to understand, we need to understand what exactly is peering, right? Because peering is another concept that we need to be able to understand, right? So the best way to understand peering, it says here, peering is basically connecting two virtual networks, so resources in both networks can communicate with each other as if they were in the same network, right? So now imagine, let's say, if we go back to this diagram, right? So now imagine this is a virtual network and there was another virtual network. If you wanted these virtual networks to actually communicate with each other, that's when you'd use peering. So peering is basically two virtual networks communicating with each other. So that's what peering is all about. So don't be scared about this word. So you can see here, we've got a virtual network over here and we've got a virtual network over here. Now there is some sort of connection or communication between these two networks. So that in essence is actually peering, right? So that's my simplest sort of definition of these words. Honestly, it might feel simplified, but if you're not a cybersecurity person, you have to figure out a way to break down these concepts in a much more digestible way. Because unfortunately, if you're going to be writing this exam, you really do need to understand cybersecurity to some extent, even though you're not coming from a cybersecurity background. So hopefully this explains to everyone in a much more simpler way. So express route, private connection. You want to connect to your cloud environment, it's a private way for you to do it. The other way, you can do it through a virtual private gateway. So it's a way for you to sort of encrypt your communication just to be much more safer. Then subnets is a way for you to further divide your resources into certain components. I think it makes it easier for you to actually do that. So it's spoken about VPN gateway, express route. So I think everyone should be fine with that one, right? Hopefully everyone is still on the chat. If you can still hear me, please just I don't know, whatever indication that you are live and you can actually hear me, I would greatly appreciate that, because I'm not seeing any engagements. It's really hard for me to gauge if someone is actually especially if you're used to being in a sort of like a Microsoft Teams environment where you're getting feedback from people, comments, I think these live sessions on YouTube can be quite tricky to work around because of that. So your comments are really important for me to see if you can. Cool. So the other side that you need to understand, right, we are covering the security side, right? Other sort of components that you need to be familiar with or to sort of understand, this goes to your identity services, right? So you need to be familiar, what is Microsoft Intra? I think Intra, I'm not sure how other people call it, right? Microsoft Intra is basically an amazing identity and access management tool that Microsoft actually created, right? It really does help you quite a lot, right? So I think it's a really tool. It's an amazing tool, especially for. Okay, someone says I can hear you. Okay, that. Thank you for that. Right. So I think you need to understand these services, right? Because it's really going to be important. They will test you on them in the exam, right? So you've got Microsoft Intra ID, right? So Microsoft Intra ID, the best way to understand it, it's an identity and access management service. It allows you to identify people, right? It centralizes your access and your centralized access and identity, right? It allows you to implement single sign-on. It allows you to do multi-factor authentication, which are all things that are really important, right? It allows you to manage users, group apps, and registrations and stuff like that. So that's the really core service of this. And then you've got intra-domain sort of services. So it's a way for you to manage your different sort of domains, right? So domains would be like a way for you to group certain resources and manage the authentication or whatever from that particular group. So you also get intra-domain services and managed domains. So you don't have to worry about setting it up and making sure that it's working. They manage that for you and all of that, right? So there's a couple of use cases here. They say it's good for lift and shift legacy applications, running apps requiring domain services, integrate seamlessly with Intra ID, right? You know, this is some of the things that you need to be able. And in the exam, actually, they might actually test you in a sense of saying, if an organization wanted to minimize any sort of like costing or set up activities, right, they might want to use the intra-domain services because it's actually it's managed, right? You don't have to worry about maintenance and all of that. So they might test you to understand if they always try to test you if you understand what service is applicable to whatever situation or scenario that you are sort of facing. Then the last one here is Microsoft Intra-Connect. Look, Intra-Connect is really great because if we go back over here, right, there was this diagram that we had over here. Now, if you look at this particular organization that we have here, they've got resources on the cloud and they've got resources on premise. So they do have a presence on premises. Now, if you've got employees here or people that you want to sync onto the cloud, right, you've got users and you want to sync these people onto the cloud, what you use is something called Intra-Connect, right? Because this is how it's normally set up, hopefully. Right, so on premises, you've got something called AD, right? AD would be Active Directory. Active Directory. Right, Active Directory basically is your on-premises version, right? This is your, I don't want to say offline, but it's the one that you use within your company. It's your on-premises version of where, so it allows you to manage users, authenticate users. If someone wants to log into an application, you've got a way of actually managing that access onto the AD on-premises version, right? It allows you to be able to do all of that, right? And then when you go to Azure, you've got Intra ID, right? So these two sort of do the same, but this one works on premises, right? Meaning in your local premises and in the data centers that you own. And then you've got Intra ID. This one is for the cloud version. Now, if you've got people or users on premises and you want to sync them over to Intra, you want them, because what you're trying to do is you don't want to create more users or new users on the cloud, right? You already have the users and you just want to sync them onto the cloud without any sort of administrative activities. What comes here in the middle, here, what actually does the connection is then called Intra right? That's your Intra-Connect. So Intra-Connect allows you to sync the users onto the cloud, which is why it's very important for you to understand what is your sync status, where is it sitting, you know, all of those other things are very important for you to sort of understand as you're looking at Intra, right? So Intra-Connect allows you to sync all of your users over here. So on premises, it's Active Directory. On the cloud, it's called Intra ID. It used to be called Active Directory on both platforms, but the later on changed the name and they called it Intra ID, right? So now it's called Active Directory on premises. and intra on the cloud, right? So that's another very important sort of distinction to understand, right? So now your intra-connect, as you can see, it bridges the gap between on-prem and AD. It syncs your users across, and so you don't have to people don't have to create their passwords again, right? If you already had your password on premises, everything is synced, right? It enables a hybrid. So because some companies do not want to use the cloud fully, right? If you don't want to fully just use the cloud, you want to be able to use your on-premises plus the cloud, and that's when your Microsoft Intra comes into play. It helps you to be able to balance those two, or to be able to do activities on both. I think my network either dropped or something, but I can see that I'm back, right? So it is a very useful feature, right? And then you've got sync methods. These are other benefits that you can actually have as you work through this, but that's one thing. That's one of the things that I think is very important. So in the exam, they might actually ask you to say, if you were using on-premises and cloud, what would you use to actually be able to sync your users, right? Then you know that they're actually speaking to intra connect, because they might give you that yes or no type of scenario where they say, if it is actually if you're trying to sync your users, is intra the correct solution, then you need to be able to say, okay, cool, intra is actually the correct solution, right? So hopefully that would come in handy, right? Cool. And I think the other part I think either my network is just getting bad, but hopefully everyone, if you guys cannot hear me when my network is either bad or something like that, please just let me know. I can either switch off the camera or something, right? Cool. So I think the other part that I want us to basically cover is authentication and external identities, right? So this is another aspect that is very important for you to understand, right? So your Azure tenant is basically, so when you want to use a Microsoft resource, you go to Microsoft and you subscribe to their things and whatever, and you get an Azure tenant, right? For each Azure tenant, you basically get an intra ID. So an intra ID basically means that it's going to manage the access to all your users, right? Single sign-on. So single sign-on means that you just log in once and you don't have to present your password again, because Intra already recognizes you, and whatever application that you try to get into, it says, I know this person, you can let them in, right? It's basically, I think the best way I can explain it is, let's say you go to a particular security, right? Let's say you're trying to get into a building, right? If one of the security verifies you and they say you can actually go ahead, that practically means that you don't have to present your identification at other gates, because once the first security says they know you, that's fine. And when you get to another gate, instead of you presenting your ID or whatever, they'll just call the initial security, and that initial security says, no, I know this person, I have verified them, so you don't have to verify them again. So that's what single sign-on is all about, right? You get verified once, and if anyone wants to know who you are, they communicate with that security, and they understand who basically you are without you having to sort of present your documentation over and over and over again, right? So it's this idea to say, if we verify you once, we don't have to go through the process of verifying again. We just need to check with the people that verified you that, okay, cool, you are actually vetted out and you've got some sort of identification. It really does minimize a lot of effort, and it prevents the risk of you losing, let's say, your credentials. But using the example that I spoke about, imagine now you have to present your ID every single time, whatever location. You might potentially lose your ID, and that's an issue. So even with your passwords, if you have to present your password every single time, you might end up being at risk of being attacked or exposed, right? Yes, I will be sharing the slides after the training. Yeah, I'll try to add them into an accessible link on the description. So yeah, thank you for the comments. I do want to see comments, guys, please. They help me to know that these people are actually watching. Okay, cool. So that's what single sign-on is all about. And then there's also something called multi-factor authentication, right? Multi-factor authentication, I'm sure most of you might be familiar with it, right? MFA is basically you saying that, I'm sure you guys have seen that when you try to log on to or sign into a particular account, they would either send you a code on your mobile device, and then you have to make sure that the code that you're importing actually matches, that's actually called multi-factor authentication. So it's finding additional ways to authenticate someone. Then conditional access, I'm sure there is a slide that speaks to this. Oh, actually, there is a slide, right? Conditional access, right? This is basically checking a number of things to see if you are the appropriate person, but I'm not going to cover it now. Maybe let's look at it in the next slide, because there is a slide that actually speaks to that concept, right? So let me not spoil the fun. All right, cool. So basically what's important in this slide to understand, right, I would say there's B2B and there's also B2C. So actually I have a very good example for this one, right? So B2B, it's when different organizations are basically sort of like inviting each other. Now think about this. Let's say you work for a particular company and you work as a consultant within that company, right? Because you work as a consultant within that company, you've got different clients that actually consult to you. You've got different companies that actually come for you to get advice or certain things like that, right? So let's say I work for a particular consulting company and I've been assigned to a bank to actually provide consulting service to the bank. So what the bank will do, they will take my company email address and they would grant me access to their resources, right? So they are taking an existing business email address and they're adding it into their account. So you might appear as a guest, maybe some of you might have actually experienced this, where you have to go maybe contracted to another company, but you still use your email address and get access to people's teams and stuff like that. That's an example of a B2B type of thing, where you come with your email into another organization, right? So it allows you to be invited via email, use your own credentials. So you don't have to change your password, right? You don't have to create a new password. You can still use your previous credentials and get access to this, right? So that's another one. This is a B2B solution. So different organizations granting each other access, because it does happen, right? Sometimes companies want to communicate or share resources, and the safer way to do it is to bring people onto your own Azure tenant, right? To be able to manage the access for security reasons, right? It's a better way of actually managing things. Then there's another model, and I think this one applies to me because what we do in our academy is that we normally, so when you come to, let's say, study data analysis or data science within our academy, we take your email address, whether it's a Gmail, it's an Outlook, or whatever email address that we have, we add you as a guest within our tenant. So I normally get people's email address and I go to Microsoft and I add them as a guest or whatever, so that they can access our teams, they can access all of our channels, and we can share resources with them, because we don't want to be sharing resources over email or whatever. It might not be as safe, but if I invite them to be tenants, not really tenants, invite them to be guests within my own network, right? This one is different because this is individuals that are using Gmail accounts and they're coming to my academy to learn data analysis, so they still use their own email address. The other one is basically two different organizations, let's say Investec and F&B, coming together and they want to collaborate on something and they're giving their teams access to their channels. So that's a B2B. B2C is when an organization invites normal people, like the one that I gave, for example, in my case, where our students don't have to create new email addresses. We just bring them with their email address and give them guest access so they can still access information that they basically need. So that's the distinction. So just understand this, because they might actually ask you, they might say a company wants to bring on board another company. What is the solution? B2B or B2C? A company wants to onboard people with their Gmail accounts. What is the solution? B2C or B2B? So you understanding the difference between those actually does make it much more easy for you as you answer the questions in the exams, right? Cool. Now, the other, let's say, security area that I want us to understand as we prepare for the exam. Some of you might be familiar with this, and I think maybe this could be a refresher. For some of you, that is their first time, I think maybe some people would watch the video afterwards and it could be their first time. I think it might come in handy for some people. So that's why I'm trying to explain these concepts as most basic and easy as, because I know some people that write this might be completely outside of the IT domain, and it's a really great certification to get started, especially in IT, and understand how cloud actually works overall, right? So the next area I want us to cover, this one is called access controls, right? There's a number of different access controls that organizations can use. The first one is role-based access control. So what role-based access control is, a lot of organizations actually use this, right? So based on your role, are you supposed to get access to a certain folder? Now think of an organization that has a number of teams. That you could be a trainee, there could be a manager, So companies define to say, if you are a manager, this is what you need to get access to. If you work in HR, this is what you need to get access to. So your access is defined based on your role. So your role actually detects what access you need to be sort of able to get. So that is what they call role-based access control, right? So if you're a manager, should we allow you to read the document, right? Should we allow you to edit the document? Should we allow you to even be the owner of the document, right? So if you're an owner, it means that you can delete the entire document, and you can even replace people and put people wherever that you want. We even see this in like the WhatsApp group chats that we might actually have, right? Some people are the admin can decide who to add, who to remove, and you might decide who do you want to have access to add people and stuff like that. So role-based access really says, based on your role, are you supposed to have access to this? So it's a very, it's used across organizations. That's why you see that someone working in finance might not have access to information for someone working in HR type of thing. So that's basically how this whole thing is actually applied, right? Then also you've got conditional access. Now this is a very interesting type of access control, right? So conditional access basically says, let's say it's in the middle of the night, right? You decide to look onto your laptop, right? What conditional access actually tries to say, there's a possibility that someone could actually steal your phone, right? That is very much possible. So someone could actually steal, let's say, your laptop, whatever, and they might try to log in, right? If they see someone logging in from America when we know that you are in South Africa, then that could be suspicious. Maybe someone in America is trying to do some fraudulent activities and they're accessing your device. So conditional access looks at the location, the device state. Is it compliant? If your device is not compliant, it might not be even granted access. The user risk, right? And the multi-factor authentication required. So conditional access is basically policies that you set up to try to say, even if someone knows your password, can you find other ways of ensuring that they do not get access to your computer, right? If someone steals your laptop, right? If they do not have your phone, they cannot multi-factor authenticate because they won't be able to get the code, but you will get the code, so they will not be able to log into your device, right? So it's a security measure that they put in. If someone tries to access your computer from a whole different country that you are not registered at, so normally companies would say, for our employees, if there is any attempt to log in that's coming from America or whatever, so they decide what countries they want to prevent from actually logging in and stuff like that. So that's conditional access. It even looks at the location, the Wi-Fi and stuff like that. They look at so many different things, and it helps you to add extra security measures. So it's a really a way to say, even if you've got access, can we still manage, right? Role-based access, can we give you access based on your role? Conditional access, can we actually give you access based on whether you meet the location criteria, you multi-factor authenticated and stuff like that. So that's what that speaks about, right? Cool. Hopefully there is no questions. We will be taking a break soon. I'm also starting to get tired, but we are almost halfway. Right. Cool. So I think the other area that we also need to look at is something called zero trust model. Right. So as you prepare for the exam, you need to be able to understand what zero trust is really all about. Right. It's another very important concept in the exam. Right. So in simple terms, zero trust basically means that don't trust anything, verify everything, right? Never trust, always verify. So this says, even if a device is within our company, even if we know this person, always verify, right? It's a safety precaution, right? Always verify everything, right? It says verify explicitly, least privileged access. So always make sure that you're granting someone the least amount of privilege. Don't just, even if someone is new and they're being onboarded, by default, give them the lowest possible privilege, right? And always assume breach. So this basically means that always don't trust any type of access, but always verify everything, right? It's an important measure. It ensures that some of the devices are sort of kept much more safer. So it basically means that you must verify everything. So that's one thing that I would say. Some of the characteristics: verify explicitly, least privilege. So always apply least privilege, meaning that whoever that you onboard to your team, always give them the lowest possible privilege. If you want some sort of higher privilege, there needs to be some sort of approval, right? Do some sort of approval. Don't just give everyone admin access by default of them being onboarded into a particular environment. So that's one thing that I'd say about this one. Right, cool. Then I think this is probably this last slide. So we're going to cover this one, and we're going to take like a 10-minute break so that everyone can just breathe. I think I also need to breathe a bit, but yeah. So the last part, say cybersecurity concept that you need to understand for the exam. This one is called defense in depth, right? So defense in depth is really this cool concept of saying that instead of giving someone explicitly access to the data, right, try to add additional layers, right, that try to prevent the person from getting in or whatever, right? So the first layer that you've got now, imagine, let's say someone is trying to get access to the data within your company, right? What are the various ways or security measures that you actually got? So firstly, there's access to the building, right? Let's say there's a particular computer sitting at, I'm just gonna make an example of a company, let's say FNB or Standard Bank, right? Let's use Standard Bank, for example, right? Let's say there's a particular Standard Bank and you're trying to get into Standard Bank, right? There's physical security. You have to provide that identity to say, I'm here to visit someone else, or you need to prove that why are you even getting into the building, right? Either you've got an access card. If you don't have an access card, then provide your identity, right? Provide your identity, show that who you are. So it makes it difficult for you to just get into the building and all of a sudden you're accessing everyone's computer at Standard Bank or whatever bank that it could be, right? So it's sort of a precaution. And also you've got some sort of like CCTV footage for you to know who actually got in so that you can actually investigate, right? It's the first defense. Then the other thing, you've got perimeter, right? This is your firewalls and stuff like that. So perimeter speaks to your fire. I think this one is very simplistic, right? Physical security, everyone normally understands it. The other one is perimeter. Now, perimeter, this is where you put your firewalls. I'm sure this, like, what if I'm not physically accessing the bank, but I'm actually doing it remotely using my device, right? So there is another layer, right? So you can actually use perimeter. So perimeter basically says use firewalls, you know, denial of access, DDoS protection and stuff like that, because people try to send DDoS attacks and stuff like that to sort of get into your environment and stuff like that. So have firewalls. So firewalls could be your first line of defense to say, before someone even gets in, do you filter out the network? You know, what certain networks are you allowing into your environment and stuff like that? So that could be your firewalls and stuff like that. Then you've got network security groups, right? So network security groups. So basically you allowing certain networks also, it's an additional layer for you to access certain network traffic, whatever, into your environment. Then you've got your virtual network segmentation. You guys saw when we looked at that diagram to say, you know, there's a protection to the cloud that you don't just get access to the cloud. There has to be other ways you need to get in. So it's another way of actually putting some sort of security measures. And then only after going through this, you've got compute. Compute is your virtual machine security. So the computers also have their own security measures, right? There is some sort of virus protection. There's patching and updates that are applied to these computers to make sure that they are protected. So after going through all of this, you still need to go through the compute VM patching and stuff like that, the security, right? There's another area that you actually need to go into. And if you go through that, you've got applications. Applications also require you to have some sort of secure code, vulnerabilities and stuff like that. So there's a couple of things. So before you even get to the data, there is so much that you have to do. So this is a way for you to slow down, let's say hackers or whatever. So it's a really cool concept that allows you to slow down people that are trying to hack into your network or get access to your resources, right? So if you see anything in relation to defense in depth, that's what they speak about. But in the exam, the way that they would actually test you, they would want to test you based on whether they say, they might give you a scenario to say, let's say someone is trying to get into a building. What is the first line of security defense? It's your physical security. If someone is doing it online, perimeter, right? Firewalls, compute, they have to understand the different ones and when do they actually apply. And then only after that you can get access to the data, right? So it's really adding so many layers that even if someone wanted to hack you, they have to go through so much, and you need to give the hackers some work to actually do before they just get into your environment, right? It's a way for you to just give them a lot of work instead of them just getting into your building. There's so many layers that actually prevent them from getting access to your environment, right? And the last one here that I've got is something called Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So Microsoft has got a solution to protect your cloud environment. They call it Microsoft Defender for Cloud. It monitors the security posture across your layers, and it also provides recommendations. So if maybe there's certain weaknesses on how you've configured your resources or certain things that are missing, it actually does recommend to you to say, this is what you need to do in order to actually. So in the exam, they might ask you, what tool monitors your security posture? What tool provides recommendations for you to actually see what's happening in your environment? And if you don't know that it's actually Microsoft Defender, you might get the answer wrong. So those are some of the questions that actually might come from this particular sort of question, right? Okay, cool. So I would say, before we come back to this question, rather, let's take a break. I think we've went over an hour, right? I think let me just end this. Let me end this. I'm just going to say keep, and maybe let me just go back over here, and I'm going to add a new slide, right? So what time it is now? It is, okay, maybe let's say, I'm gonna say back at 18:30. Okay, let's come back at this time. We're just going to go for a 10-minute break, and we should be back at this time. And then from there, we're actually going to go through the questions. All right, cool. Okay, we are back. Hopefully everyone can now hear me. Okay, let's go. Okay, let me set up my chat over here, please. Guys, use the comment section if you have got questions, right? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think we'll just get started. Just trying to see where we actually left off. So I think what we did was basically going through some of the cybersecurity terminology. We went through a couple of things. I think we covered quite a lot, right? Like I said, we might not be able to cover everything. The exam is very broad, but hopefully some of the things, if there was something that maybe you did not understand initially, hopefully you take something, at least even if it's one thing, right? Even if it's one thing that you've taken out of the exam, I think for me it's a win for some extent, right? So hopefully someone is benefiting from this, right? Okay, cool. Hopefully the questions are clear, because I think my worry is with using the let me see if I do this right, and because when I put presentation mode, it just makes it difficult for me to access anything else. Let me see. Okay, but I think it's fine for now. I'll just look at the chat over here, and I've got another screen at the top there just to check if the connection and network is still good. Okay, cool. Okay, so finally our first question in security. So I've got a few questions for this one specifically, but hopefully the items that we were covering, the things that I was speaking about, could actually be of help during the exam, right? So the first question, this is one of those questions where they give you a solution and they ask you to say if the solution is correct or not, right? So the first one, let's just break it down. I'm just going to ignore this first part, but we're going to jump into here. So you are planning to migrate, right? Let me see if I can get the editor over here. There we go, I've got a pen now. So you're planning to migrate, so you want to migrate your company to Azure. So you're migrating your company to Azure. That's the first thing. Each of the company's numerous divisions will have an administrator. So you basically have a company that has got multiple divisions, could be finance, HR, marketing, and all of that. All right, cool. So there's going to be an administrator assigned to each division. So that's what we are getting, right? Cool. In place to manage the Azure resources used by, you guys remember yesterday we were speaking about management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, that type of thing. So this would be related to some of those concepts. You want to make use of the Azure deployment. You employ, I don't know why I'm struggling to read this. You want to make sure that the Azure deployment you employ allows for Azure to segment, right? Keyword. Segment for the division. So you want to segment for each division while keeping administrative effort at a minimum. You see, whenever you see this word, the word minimum always tells you something. It can either be from a costing perspective or from an effort perspective. So whatever solution that you choose, it needs to minimize the amount of effort that you put in. So hopefully someone is already thinking about what's the answer, right? If it's a yes, just type yes. I think everyone has got access to the chat. Just type yes. If you think it's no, just type no, right? But there's no wrong or right answer. We will break it down for everyone, right? Cool. So I think the first thing that we're seeing here, they're saying the solution to this problem, right? So we've got a company and they've got multiple divisions, and we want to have an administrator for each division because we want to manage the resources for each and every single division and stuff like that, right? And I'm guessing even the costing side of it, right? Cool. So there's a solution here that they're giving us. They're saying you plan to make use of several Azure Active Directory, right? The moment you see this, Azure Active Directories, right? So what they're saying here, right? If I can go back to the top, hopefully I've got this. Cool. So what they're saying is that for us to resolve this problem, they want us to have multiple Azure Active Directories, right? So you're going to have another one over here, right? So you're going to have multiple Active Directories that you're going to have to create. So let's say you've got 10 departments. You're going to create 10 different Active Directories, right? I don't know about that, but to me, that already seems like a lot of work, because if you're creating multiple Active Directory, you need to do a lot of configuration for each Active Directory environment, right? And you need to do the setup. So I don't know about this one, because it really does sound like a lot, right? Because, did I skip the question? Oh, I think I might have shown the answer, but hopefully no one saw the answer. Okay, so what this solution is saying, we need to create 80 instances, right? If we have marketing 80, and I'm going to say 80, M is going to be marketing, right? Then we create another 80 instance. F is going to be for finance, then another 80 instance, and then this is going to be for HR, right? That's what the solution is proposing. Now, the problem with this is for each AD, there's a lot of configuration that you have to do, right? There's a lot of configuration that you have to do. Honestly, for me, this is a very big problem, because why not just have, right? You can, because what they're looking for basically is a way for you to segment each department, right? And one of the solutions that we have learned about to do this is management groups, right? So I would have my AD, right? And then just have management groups, right? My God, this is so bad, right? This is really bad. That's the worst handwriting I've seen in years. But yeah, then you've got AD over here. Then you can separate this. Management groups allows you to segment your, then you can have marketing over here. You can have finance over here. You can have HR over here, right? You've got one Active Directory instance that you set up, and then you can segment this other areas. Then you can have a subscription. I'm going to add this. You can have a subscription over here. Then you can have a subscription over here. Then you can have a subscription over here. For each of these, I can assign an administrator for here, and I can assign. So each area could actually have its own administrator. So honestly, if I'm minimizing effort, my best solution is to use management groups. This whole idea of creating so many different Active Directories, honestly, I don't think it's going to work. It's really going to create a lot of work for us. So I don't think this is a solution, right? But let's see what the answer actually is, right? So this is what they say. So using multiple Active Directories allows you to create, you can get to that point, right? It is a solution, but is it the most efficient solution? Because you saw there, they specifically say, what is the best solution, right? So you have to choose the best solution, the solution that actually minimizes and work effort and stuff like that. So that was the key word. So using multiple Azure Active Directories allows you to create separate identity and access management. So it does solve the problem for each division, right? So each Active Directory can have its own users and stuff like that. Not to say this doesn't work, it actually does work. But my problem with this technique is that it increases overhead. We don't want to do that. You have to manage all of those different instances and all of that. It limits collaboration, because now remember, once you've got different AD instances, you have to go through the B2B type of thing where you have to onboard people onto your tenant and stuff. It really is a lot of work. You do not want to have multiple Active Directory instance. You don't want to do that. Get different Azure Active Directories, right? Multiple Azure directories is really going to be a problem for your organization, right? Complexity, even to govern this thing, is going to be, this is a lot of work. So it's very clear that the correct answer is not yes, but the answer is basically no, because I think the better solution would be to use a single Active Directory with a Azure role-based access subscription. Yes, definitely. So you could even assign role-based access, right? So this is another one, because you could say for this environment, I'm going to assign this person the access, but who are the administrators? You can actually segment that. You can give them access based on roles and responsibilities. So the whole idea of creating all of those AD directories I do not agree with that one. It does create a lot of work. So, that's one of the ways of on one of the questions you might see, and just remember the different solutions that you actually have at your disposal. My God, I think I just went overboard a bit. Cool. Now, we've got another question, right? So this question says, I think it starts, so establish the solution. Okay, it's another yes or no, right? They love this yes or no's actually, right? So you have been informed by your superiors of the organization, intention to automate, right? They want to automate server deployment, right? This is what they want to automate, server deployment on Azure. There is, however, some concern that administrative credentials could be uncovered during this process. So people's credentials could be uncovered. That's the concern, right? You are required to make sure that during the deployment, the administrative credentials are encrypted. This is it. So you have to make sure that the credentials of the people are actually encrypted using a solution that Azure has. Azure does have an encryption solution, right? And I can tell you right now, multi-factor authentication is not an encryption. Multi-factor authentication basically says if you try to log in, you need to provide additional ways of actually authenticating, right? If you try to log in, you have to verify the code that you see on your screen and on your computer, or you have to log onto another device, or you have to get a code or whatever via SMS, and you have to present all of that, right? So honestly, to encrypt, MFA has nothing to do with encryption, right? So this is definitely a no. MFA has nothing to do with encryption. Okay, so here's the solution. Microsoft Azure MFA basically is an additional layer of security requiring the user to provide 2 or more forms of authentication, right? To encrypt administrative credentials, you should consider Azure Key Vault. So this is our solution here. So Azure Key Vault is a cloud-based service that provides secure storage and management of secret keys and stuff like that. So anything to do with securing your vaults and keys, you know that it's Azure security, it's the Azure Key Vault. So MFA has nothing to do with that. So that one, it was a clear no, honestly, right? A more suitable solution would be to use the Azure Key Vault to securely store and retrieve the administrative credentials during the process, ensuring they remain encrypted and protected, right? So that would be the correct answer. So if you did not know what is Azure Key Vault, it might have been difficult for you to answer this question. But because you know what is Azure Key Vault, actually MFA has nothing to do with encryption, right? Very important. And that's how you go about sort of like answering some of those questions. Cool. So another question that we've got over here. So question number 9 says, you are planning a strategy to deploy numerous web servers and database servers to Azure, right? So here's the key. Numerous, where was numerous? Did I see things? Numerous servers and databases to Azure. This strategy should allow for connection types between the web servers and database to be controlled. Okay. So basically, you want to be able to control the connection between these web servers, right? And you have to figure out a solution that actually does this, right? Now, what they present to us is something called, the solution is to include network security group in your strategy. I think this is right. Right? But let's see. So what I did, I tried to create some sort of diagram explaining what network security groups actually do, right? So if you see something called NSGs, I know some of these security concepts can be quite interesting sometimes, right? So the best way to understand the network security group is basically to say, right, it's basically a way to control the kind of traffic that your resources are exposed to, right? The very simplest definition, right? If you look at this, This network security group basically states that if, let's say, traffic is coming into your environment, right, it says allow 44.3, allow 80, and deny anything that does not meet this criteria, deny it, right? And if you go further here, once you're inside here, you can see that this network security group says allow 44.3, right, and deny 22. This one says allow 44, 14, 33, and deny all, right? So what this does actually, if you've got if let's say this is a web server, this is a database server, right? If you wanted to access, so if there were to be any network that communicates with this, and any network that communicates with this, it needs to comply with the rules that have actually been defined over there. So it manages what in sort of like internet or whatever network your resources sort of get exposed to. And if we go here, it says you are planning to deploy numerous web servers and database to Azure. The server should allow for connection types between the two and database server to be controlled. You see, you want to control connection types. That is the key word. You want to be able to control the connection types. And the way for you to control the connection types is through using network security groups, because they control what is allowed, what is denied, and all of that. So this one is correct. But if you do not understand what network security groups actually are, you might have struggled to answer this question. So it's very important to understand what those are. Some of those concepts are not as difficult as, I understand that, the first time that when I also read some of those things, they're really hard to understand, but network security groups are a way for you to just filter the network that tries to get access to your resources, right? So don't worry, you'll get the slides. So there's one thing I would say, this solution was actually correct, right? It says, yes, network security groups provide a flexibility and effective way to control and secure network between different tiers of applications architecture within Azure. So it does allow you to be able to manage the network access and all of that control. So I'll definitely give it to that. So I think those were the questions that I basically had for the network side of things, right? If you guys have questions, you can, but like I said, I'm not really a network expert, but this is my understanding that got me to pass the exam, basically, right? Remember, security is not everything in this exam, unless you're writing the SC900, right? For those that are more interested in the security side, you can write the SC900. It's an entry-level security type on the Azure side of things, right? But after doing the certification, when you go to the security one, you'd find that it's much more easier to do because you've got some foundation understanding of what exactly cloud computing is. And some of the things that you learn here, they're actually also covered on the SC900, which is the security certification, right? Cool. I'm not a security person, but yeah, cool. So I think here what I want to do for you guys is basically take you through some of the core concepts that are going to be important for you to understand as you sort of like write the exam, right? Some of these concepts are really going to be important to really help you, let's say, better be prepared for the exam. That's one thing that I would say. So you still need to understand the different Azure storage types. That's another very important concept, right? So Azure provides you with 4 different storage types, right? You've got the blob storage, right? So blob storage is mostly for unstructured data. Anything that has to do with storing unstructured data, that this is in relation to the blob storage, right? So if you want to store movies, images, videos, stuff like that, and there's multiple tiers. There's the hot, cold, and archive, right? This is another very important concept to understand, actually, right? So the hot tier, this is the one that you can access immediately, right? The hot tier basically means it's live and running, right? To say if you wanted to access your information, right? I think this is how they normally test it in the exam, right? So if you're using a blob storage and you wanted to access your information immediately, you want to use the hot tier because that one is closer and you can access it immediately, right? If you're working with data that you don't need to access every single day and you just need to access it sometimes, you might want to use the cool tier because it's a bit slower, but it's good. It's cheaper. Actually, the colder it gets, the cheaper these things actually get, right? The hot one is very expensive because you want immediate access. Cold one is slightly cheaper than the hot one because it's much more slower. The archive, if you've got information that you access once a year, you want to use the archive, right? So in the exam, you must pay attention to this, and they might try to trick you with this one, right? They might ask you that if you're using Azure Blob Storage and the particular company that you're working on does not need to access the data every single day and they want to minimize expenses, you have to use the archive or the cool, depending on how often. If they say they only access the data once every, let's say, once a year or once every 10 years, definitely archive, because archive is much more stable. There's not everyone accessing the information in and out. Cool is in between. Hot is when you want immediate access to your data. So that's one thing that I would say. Very important concept. Do not take that for granted. So understand the difference between the cool and know when to use it, right? If I want to see my data in real time, I'm definitely going for the hot tier. And if I want to save money to some extent, maybe the cool tier. So pay attention to those keywords as they sort of guide you in which one you should choose, right? And then it's very good for storing a lot of data. That's one thing that I would say, right? And it's accessed via REST API and SDK and stuff like that. Right? So there's a couple of things that you can actually use over here, right? And then the other one is the file storage. I feel like this one is a fully managed service, right? When it says fully managed, if you hear a word saying minimize effort, fully managed actually means minimize effort, right? Because if something is fully managed, it actually means that Microsoft is managing everything for you, and there's little setup that you have to do as an organization because it's fully managed, right? This one can replace on-premise file servers, so it's really good for shared files or anything like that. Any file type of system structure, you want to use the file storage. So this is a different storage type that they offer, right? So they also offer you disk storage. This one is a managed disk from Azure. You get access to it over the SSD. I think most of our laptops these days are SSD. There's still some people that choose HDD. I don't know. I don't know why you choose that one, but it's much more slower for you to access your data currently, right? It's good if you want to encrypt data at rest by default. See, that's the keyword. If there is a need for encryption at rest, you might actually choose for this one, right? Snapshots and disk, so it allows you to have snapshots of your data, and also you get disk backup. So think about all these features because they are important in the exam, and they try to trick you in the exam to see if you can actually choose the correct answer, right? The last one is queue. So this one is messaging queue. So it stores meters if you've got messaging information. This is what you want to use. It syncs processing between applications, decouple application component and all of that. Some of the important components, right? But unstructured data, definitely going for the blob storage. So just keep those in mind. They love the blob storage. I can see the others, but they love the blob storage because they can trick you with these levels, right? You need to remember which one is applicable based on whatever scenario that you actually are dealing with, right? Cool. Then the other storage type that I think is also very much important for you to, okay, this is actually the use cases, right? They're actually telling us the use cases, images, disk, or whatever, shared configuration and stuff like that. So this is just giving us some of the use cases for those now. Now, if you are migrating data as an organization, Microsoft does provide a couple of options for you to. So this is another area that they might actually test you on, right? So the different ways that you would, hopefully everyone can actually hear me. I'm just hoping that everyone can hear me because I don't think anyone is sending comments, but hopefully everyone can hear me. Okay, cool. So with this one, if you're moving data to Azure, you've got multiple different options, right, that you can actually utilize. Now, the first one here is called the AZ copy. So this one is a command line. If you like coding, if you like writing code in these command line platforms, you might use AZ copy. So copy blobs of files. So it actually allows you to copy blobs and files from storage accounts. It supports the syncing, copy, remove option, works with blob file table. So you see the compatibility, right? You need to know what this thing is actually comparable to, because in the exam, they might actually test you to see if you know what this migration tool is comparable to, right? And the next one, authentication via Azure AD, and okay, this might not be that important. Ideal for scripting and automation. Now, if you want to automate things, if you love writing scripts, you're gonna use the AZ copy, I think it's really good for that. I wouldn't, because yeah, sometimes writing code is not the best, but it would actually save you time because it allows you for automation. There's another concept around infrastructure as code, right? Writing code to build infrastructure. That's something they might actually test you on in the exam, right? The other one we've got is the Azure file sync. So this is a hybrid file sync, right? So this one allows you to sync on-premises files, servers into Azure. So if you're migrating files, you might want to use this one. Keeps frequent files local. So if there's certain files that are using every day, it keeps them local, makes them more accessible. Multi-site across locations, so it works across multiple locations. Transparent to users, yeah. Then you've got the third point over here. You've got the Storage Explorer. So this one has got a graphical user interface. So this GUI basically means a graphical. So that means you can actually go to a screen and you can say, I want to migrate this and that and that. Unlike here, you have to write code. You have to specify what you want to do, and you have to do it in the format of coding, right? That's one thing I'd say with this one. So this one, it's much more visual. So if in the exam they say you want to migrate data, but you do not want to write code, or you do not want to use command line, then you know that actually maybe this could be the solution that we need to select, right? So keywords that they play around with, honestly. Trust me, guys, the exam is not so difficult. I think what catches people is not being able to catch the keyword. It's all about keywords. If you don't catch the keyword, you might get the answer incorrect. That's the most important thing. Make sure that you capture the keyword. Right, cool. So now, with this one, it's a graphical user interface, allows for all, so managing all storage services, browse blobs, queues, and all of that. Okay, cool. Upload, download, so it's another feature available for desktop. So you know the compatibilities, right? So if you're working with this, you know what it actually supports. Then we've got the last one, the Azure Migrate. This one is good for large scale. If you're dealing with a massive migration, right? If your migration is really huge, you want to use the Azure Migrate. It's built for companies that are migrating massive amounts of data, because some of the solutions might not be able to work for you, but this one is built for massive amounts of data sets migration. So if you're migrating a lot of data and information, I would say go for this one, right? So the Azure Migrate, discover, access, and migrate, right? So you can discover data, access your data, then you can migrate your data. Data box, physical device for terabyte transfer. You also get physical devices. It ships to you, load, and ship to Azure. So it's a much more better way of actually migrating your data. Encrypted, so there's some sort of encryption. They might test you on this one. So pay attention to that feature. So I've added some keywords over here, right? So if you're dealing with large data, this one. If you're dealing with if you hybrid sync, right, different formats. If you're dealing with small data, then these are your guys to choose, right? Small data, just stick here. So this is how you eliminate the use cases. If you're dealing with massive data, just know that there's two are automatically eliminated. But if you're dealing with small data, there is no need for you to do an overkill and go for the Azure Data Migrate. So that's how you go about answering the exam, honestly, and that's how they try to trick you as much as they can to see if you actually do understand the exam, right? So cool. Then we've got our first practice question, right? So the first practice question we have here, hopefully, I know there's just 4 people attending this live. Please, guys, give me a minute. My laptop is actually dying. I need to figure out how to plug it. Okay, I'm back. It's now plugged in. Okay, cool. We are back. Cool. So the first question, if you guys know what the correct answer is, I don't know if it's my phone, but I haven't seen a comment ever since. But cool. Please, guys, I do appreciate the comments. So if you can comment, it does let me know that there's someone watching, and something is actually happening in this live. Cool. So the first question says your company needs to store large amounts of unstructured data. This is a giveaway. I'm seeing this unstructured data. Okay, such as this is an easy one. Like literally, this is an easy one. Videos and backup files. which Azure storage service would you use? Right, I think this one is pretty much straightforward. Anyone who wants to give this one a try? We just learned about it. We just learned about something that allows you to store all of those different types. Is it Q? Is it Azure File? Is it Blob? Is it Azure Disk? Anyone wants to give it a try? Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Is it D? Anyone literally on the live? I know there's 5 people, right? But anyone at all? Just a comment. Okay, I think no one wants to comment. It's fine. So I think the correct answer here is actually a given, right? Because if we go back just a bit, this is the storage type where you see images, movies, backup files. You already know that actually the correct answer has to be the Azure Blob storage, because it actually deals with that type of storage data set, right? So you can see the correct answer is blob storage, because Azure Blob storage is specifically designed for storing massive amounts of unstructured data, images, backups, logs. Disk storage is for virtual machines. File storage is for shared file systems. So the correct answer was Azure Blob storage, right? Cool. Next question. Your organization needs to migrate 80 terabyte, keyword 80 terabyte, massive amount of data to Azure, but your network bandwidth is very limited. Now, the other thing that I forgot to mention with the Azure data box, you actually load your data in some container, and then someone from Azure actually comes and gets it, and they load it to whatever data center. So you don't need internet connection to actually execute that whole thing. So this tells us large data set. This says offline, and that's definitely gonna be Azure Data Box. Hopefully we are correct. There we go. It's Azure Data Box, right? Because Azure Data Box is a physical device shipped to your location for transferring large amounts of data when network bandwidth is limited or too slow. AZ Copy and Azure are for work over the internet and stuff like that. Because think about it, it's much more smaller data set, so it works for you to do it over the internet, unlike the other one that could be requiring so much that it doesn't make sense for you to even use like the online version, right? So very, very important. Now we are almost there, guys. We are almost there. Please stay on the line. But yeah, so the next one, question number 3, this one is more networking, right? So this one says you need to filter network traffic to and from a virtual machine. Which of the Azure? Okay, this one is easy. So you're filtering network. We already know what we use to filter. Well, someone might say firewall, right? Filtering network to and from Azure virtual machines. Which Azure resource allows you to create inbound and outbound security? Now remember, firewalls would protect inbound network, but I don't know about outbound network, right? Because firewalls are basically some sort of defense from preventing any certain networks from getting in if they don't fit the protocol. So someone could have said firewalls. I get it to some extent, but I feel like network security grows because these ones filter out inbound and outbound network, right? There we go. Network security is a virtual firewall that filters inbound and outbound using okay, I see all of that. NSGs can be applied at a subnet level. Azure Firewall is managed service. VPN is, okay, I see. Right. So I think that's about it for the network and the other sort of like areas. I think that we've sort of been covering, right? So I think now we are going to jump onto the last part. Right, yeah, it really has been a long section, but I don't think for this one we have questions, right? I struggled to find questions, unfortunately, but what I did do for you guys is I've sort of highlighted, some of the key things that you sort of need to be familiar with, especially in this area, right? What you need to know. So I've covered some of those things. So the first thing on what you'll be tested on in this domain, very important. Firstly, they want to see your understanding of cost management. So cost management, they want to see if you understand what factors impact pricing in Azure, right? What actually impacts pricing in Azure? Do you know the pricing calculator? So there's various calculators that you can use to estimate the costing of certain items. So pricing calculators and all of that, and cost management, resource tags. That's another area that you need to understand. And also governance. Governance is a very important area that you need to be able to understand. Governance and compliance, right? You've got Microsoft Purview, which is a good platform to take certain data sets, resources. It allows the protection of your resources, of your data. So it prevents data loss, right? Something called DDL, data loss. I think it's called data loss. Yeah, something like that. But it prevents data loss basically in your environment, right? And compliance, this is when you use your Azure policy. So Azure policy is really great, right? Azure policy allows you to know what policies apply to the environment. It's a great place for you to get different policies and information, right? So that's something you need to understand, and that you are able to log resources, very important. The other component that is a bit more technical is the deploying resource. So you need to understand what is the Azure portal. You need to understand Cloud Shell. You need to understand CLI. You need to know PowerShell. You need to know the ARC and ARM templates, a way to just automate. When you're creating new resources, you want to make sure that they all have the same configuration, they're all compliant. So you use your ARM templates. So ARM templates, if that is new to you, please make sure that you go and read about it, because they will test you about ARM templates in the exam. So please ensure that you've got an understanding of that concept. And the other one that they will test you on is monitoring tools. So you need to understand the different monitoring tools that you've got in the environment. Like understand the key one, understand the difference between Azure Advisor, Service Health, and the monitor and the log analytics. So that's what they want to see that you understand in the exam, because they just test you on the features, right? There's nothing fancy about the exam. They just want to see that what you've learned, can you go to the real world and advise companies and say, for this problem, apply that. For that problem, apply that. That's all they want to see from you in the exam. All right. So I think the first concept that we're going to speak about, I think we already spoke about this one, but we're going to understand the difference between capital and expenditure. So capital expenditure and operational expenditure, right? That's one thing that they test you on. So remember, capital expenditure, or CapEx, basically is the upfront investment in physical infrastructure, right? So that's the one thing. Cloud computing, if you are using cloud services, you're not experiencing capital expenditure, because capital expenditure means if I want to start my own business, I need to put in money to get access to the service. But there's operational expenditure, says that you pay as you go, right? You only pay for what you use. So there's no upfront infrastructure costing and stuff like that, right? So operational expenditure is really the model that the cloud actually uses, right? So the key thing for you to understand is that Azure shifts you from capital expenditure. So from you owning, now think about it. If you had to own your own data center, you have to go and buy equipment, because you're not just going to have a data center from thin air. You need to buy your own equipment, and only after buying your own equipment, you're going to get access to a data center. So you need to invest money in order to get started. So that's capital expenditure. And then with operational expenditure, this basically means that, as you pay as you use. If you do not use anything throughout the month, they're not going to charge you anything, because you used absolutely nothing. So that's the one thing that I would say about this one. So cloud actually is more of an operational expenditure. You pay as you use, right? So if a question says about no upfront or paying only use, that's some of the questions, right? If they say they don't want any upfront investment, it's operational expenditure, right? Cool. Then the other thing that is very important to understand during the exam, these are the different things that affect the costing on Azure, right? If they ask you which of the factors here impact the amount of money that you will pay a month end, right? Things that impact the costing in Azure. Firstly, the resource type. Some resources are more expensive than others. If you're using a virtual machine, you are going to pay. Believe me, if you're using a virtual machine, you are going to pay a lot of money, right? So some resources are expensive than others. So the type of resource that you use does impact the costing or the expenses you might incur. The second one is consumption. How much resources you consume or how much time you spend using resources also does impact you in that regard. So that one is also very important, right? And geography. Look, when you go to the Azure platform, right, remember, cloud computing basically says, if I stay in South Africa, if my company is based in South Africa, I don't necessarily have to store my data in South Africa. I can store my data in any country, whether in Europe, in China, in America, right? But each country has certain prices for cloud computing based on various reasons. So if you decide to store your data, you might actually find that storing data in South Africa is more expensive than storing data in Europe, right? So the region that you're using to store your data does actually make it more expensive or cheaper. Some regions are way cheaper. South Africa is actually very expensive, surprisingly. I have no idea why, but there's obviously various things why South Africa will be expensive. Right? So the place at which you store your data does impact the costing. Another one is subscription type. Look, there's different subscriptions that you might actually use, right? We saw that some subscriptions, you've got the free tier, gives you limited resources. You've got pay as you go, which is the standard. You know, there's so many different pricing methods. There's spot pricing. There's so many different. So the type of subscription that you use from Azure does determine. I'm using a free tier. I do not pay anything for Azure, honest, because I'm like, at the moment, I have no interest in using anything. I think we're still a very small organization. Maybe as we grow, we might want to start using some of the subscriptions, but at the moment, we're not using anything, right? So we are paying zero for Azure because we're only paying for the Microsoft 365 licenses, but other than that, we're not incurring expenses on the cloud environment. The other thing is the Azure Marketplace. So the Azure Marketplace is a place where you basically get various solutions provided by vendors. So some vendors price, so for example, if you're getting a solution from, let's say, a certain company, some companies have the liberty to charge whatever they want. It could be the same solution, but because of the company you used to actually buy the resource, it could be pricing it differently, right? It's like buying food from Pick and Pay or buying food from Checkers or McDonald's, whatever. They all have their own pricing, and if you decide to buy with them, then you will be incurring that particular expense. So the type of vendor that you use actually does determine the costing for your overall. So these are the factors, the 5 factors that impact the costing in your cloud environment. So please remember those things because they will be important in the exam. All right. The other thing that I think is very important to understand as you prepare for the exam is the different calculators, right? So Azure provides you with different calculators that you can actually use. So basically you've got the pricing calculator and you've got the TCO, I'm trying to remember, is it total cost of ownership? I think it's probably called total cost of ownership. I think so. I think it's called the total cost of ownership, right? So there's 2 calculators that you can actually use, right? The first one, as you can see here, it says, before you deploy, this one says, before you decide to migrate, right? So before you deploy this pricing, this one is called the pricing calculator, right? So what the pricing calculator does, it estimates the monthly cost before using the resource. So before you use a resource on Azure, if you're wondering, if I'm going to use 10 virtual machines, how much am I going to be charged by the end of the month? If you've got that question, use the pricing calculator because it gives you the costing of resources, right? You can compare, like remember I was speaking about regions, how they impact the costing. So you can actually check per region, what region is cheaper, what region is more expensive. So you can actually do it across those various areas or lines to help you better understand what could be the better solution, right? And then you've got export estimates and stuff like that. You've got availability, available pricing. So there's a very number of things that you can do. So the key question that this one answers to say, how much will this cost me? So if you have that question, then use this one. So in the exam, they might try to see if you understand the difference between this calculator and that calculator. So remember, this one is when you want to use a resource and you want to understand how much does it cost. Then on the other hand, you've got this one. This one is called the total cost of ownership, right? I stand corrected, but that's what I think it is. All right, so this one compares the Azure cost versus on-premise. Now think about this. Your company is thinking about migrating to Azure, right? You guys have never used Azure before, but you guys are thinking of migrating to the cloud. You're like, guys, we need a new strategy. We need to move to the cloud, right? But how much is it going to cost us? Is it cheaper for us to stay on premises or is it better for us to move to the cloud? So if your company has got those 2 questions, The best way for you to answer that is by looking at the total cost of ownership. So what this one allows you to do, it allows you to compare the costing of you staying on premises and the costing of you actually moving onto the cloud. All right. So it does do a comparison of where you are right now, the resources that you're using, and also where you want to be and the resources that you might be using. So this one allows you to say, is it worth it moving to the cloud, or should we just stay where we are? Is it even, because there are instances when the cloud is not as cheaper as staying on premises, when staying on premises is much more cheaper than moving to the cloud. So in the exam, please pay attention to this, because they will try to see if you understand the difference between these two. So please just pay attention to sort of these ones, right? Cool. The other area that I think is very important to also understand, this one is called the cost management and tags, right? So Azure does provide a feature for cost management, right? So you know, you can go and see, you can also set, so firstly you can do cost analysis. So cost analysis basically visualizes and breaks down your Azure spending by resource and tags. So you can actually do some analytics on how much you've spent, what's costing you more, and it's really good for helping you investigate to see what actually is the problem in your environment, right? Cost alerts, if you want to set limits to say how much money let's say if your money gets to like 50,000, you don't want to exceed 50,000. That does happen, unfortunately. So this one is really good for helping you sort of like set alert. If you're getting to a certain threshold and you want to be notified, you can actually do that on Azure, so do not worry about that. Budget, this one allows you to create a budget to say every month I want to spend 50,000. Anything above that, please just give me an alert, right? This one is for budgeting. It really helps a lot of companies for budgeting, right? And the other one is metadata labels. So this one is really good for like labeling your data and all of that, and understanding what data set is coming from, and just managing your environment overall, right? Being able to say, okay, this actually belongs to the production, finance, you know, the owner and stuff like that. You know, it's really, really cool to actually have. But the key word is here: cost analysis, see the spending; cost alerts, get notified; budget, see the limits; tags, organize resources; full control. So those are some of the keywords, right? We are almost done, guys. We are almost done. So the other area that I think is important for everyone to remember during the exam, this one is called governance and compliance. It's a section in the exam, and you have to understand governance and compliance. Okay, cool. So governance and compliance covers a few things. Firstly, you need to know Azure policy, right? If you do not know what Azure policy is, Azure policy basically enforces organizational rules on resources, deny non-compliant deployment. So you can actually create policies on Azure to say, you know, like if something is not complying with this policy, you deny it being created. You know, it's basically you being able to add certain rules and restrictions within your platform. It's really great to have, right? Management groups, we have been speaking about management groups, right? So management groups basically organize multiple subscriptions. They apply policies and role-based access, right? If you watched day one of our class, so management groups are at the top. Then you've got subscriptions, you've got resource groups, you've got resources. So they really do help you with managing all of that sort of kind of information, right? Then at the top there, we've got resource logs. So you are able to log certain resources, because imagine someone could just go and delete your Azure resource by some mistake. I can just go and delete your virtual machine. So when you try to delete resources, there's something called Azure Log. So it prevents any accidental deletion of resources. It has two types: delete and read only, applied at a subscription role. So you can apply it at multiple levels. This is really important, because if in the exam they ask you, right, if you wanted to log certain resources, what feature would you use? That's it. Your resource logs, right? That's what you use to actually log that. And then you've got Microsoft Purview. As I indicated, Microsoft Purview is a really amazing tool. If you see anything asking about data governance, data management, or whatever, right, you know they're talking about Microsoft Purview. That should be your keyword, right? So data governance and compliance tools, data catalog discover. So it allows you to see data lineage, you know, seeing where your data actually came from and where it's actually being used. Classification, auto labeling sensitive data. It allows you to do all of that amazing thing. Unified governance across your environment. It allows you to really manage and protect the loss of data within your environment. So I think it is a good tool. So you need to understand when these tools are applied. If you're trying to ensure that your resources are compliant, Azure policy, because you're creating standard policies. If you're trying to prevent the deletion of your resources, you know that they're talking about resource lock. If you're trying to manage multiple subscriptions, management groups. If you're trying to understand the landscape of your data and trying to govern your data, Microsoft Purview. So understanding these things would really go a long way in really helping you in the exam, right? So that's why I've sort of like specifically added this section within this, right? Now, the other area that I think is very important, this one they love really asking about in the exam, right? You've got something called the Service Trust Portal. If you don't know what this is, please make sure that you read about it before you write the exam, because they will test you. I can guarantee you there will be at least one question asking you about the Trust Portal, right? So with the Trust Portal, one thing that I would say is that it's a place where you get all the compliance documents and stuff like that, right? So what they normally ask you or test you in the exam is to see if you know where to get certain documents, right? So if you can see, there's three important features on the Trust Portal. You've got the Service Trust Portal. So this is the homepage where you get access to audit reports, certifications, compliance guides, the GDPR, certain compliance documents and stuff like that, penetration testing results. And this is really information about the Microsoft platform and how it's been performing. These are also like whatever audit results that whatever auditors have been auditing the platform for. So you get all of that information there. So if you're a company and you want to use Azure, you get actually how they're performing based on whatever controls that you are interested in actually seeing, right? Then you've got a tab called All Documents. Now this is the central repository for the trust document, right? So what this one is, the All Documents allows you to search by compliance standard, download reports, and regional compliance documentation updates. If you want to find documentation, so this is all the documents, right? If you're looking for documents, you want to find it on the All Documents tab. That's where you look for it. And the last one is My Library. So My Library is your personal. Now, if you see documents that you like and you save them, they go to your library, right? So save frequently accessed documents, get notified when there's updates on the documents that, let's say there's certain compliance documents that you're interested in, you save them, they go to My Library. If there's any changes or update on that document, you actually get notified, right? So in the exam, they might actually test you to say, if you wanted to get notified on certain documents, where would you actually do this? My Library. If you wanted to get access to all documentation, where would you go? All Documents. So just understanding the difference between these two, they will actually test you about it in the exam. So I think that's one thing that I would say. So just an exam tip here, right? So the Service Trust is where you find Microsoft compliance documents and audit reports, right? That's very important. But there's different tabs where you find, if you want all documents, there you go. If you want documents that you've saved, then you know that you have to check My Library, right? I feel like that's the one thing that I would say is important, especially in that area, right? So I've got a couple of notes over here, right? These are other things that I think are important for you guys to just be mindful of. So there's Microsoft Azure PowerShell. So they will ask you about the Microsoft Azure PowerShell, right? Look, Microsoft Azure PowerShell, the important thing that you need to understand is the benefits, right? So PowerShell basically similar to your Windows admins, but allows you to integrate well with a Windows-based application, right? So it's really good for automating virtual machine backups and scheduling, right? It's really good for that. If you want something that's much more flexible, you want to go for that one. Then the other area that is important to understand is something called infrastructure as code. What infrastructure as code actually covers is it lets you define and manage infrastructure using templates or code, right? So you can literally build your infrastructure right in code. You don't have to use some interface or whatever. You write code to design your infrastructure, and it's much more efficient because you can even use, let's say, it's much more easy and repeatable, right? Like, trust me, you might think using the interface is easier, but using code to actually build infrastructure is much more easy, because with using the interface, you have to configure so many rules, but with the code, you just write the code and you specify what you need, and you can just reuse it every time. If you're talking about configuration, you have to go to the screen and do it over and over for each and every single resource. But infrastructure as a code, you could build multiple resources and automate how you want them to be configured, right? Very important. Then you've got the Azure Resource Manager. That's another one you need to know for the exam. So they call it the Azure Resource Manager. Basically, this is the engine that manages the deployment and configuration of resources. Very important. Anything with management and deployment of resources, you know that they're checking out for that. The benefits of this is that it provides consistency and the central way to control or to access Azure resources. So that's one of the benefits that I would say important to note with this one. And then we've got the ARM template JSON. So this is basically a way for you to follow certain standard ways of creating resources, right? To ensure that, you know, everything is much more clear and it's in the same standard, right? We are almost at the end. Yeah, I'm very close to exhaustion right now. Okay, we actually did cover that. Did we miss something? Or is the same slide? Okay, cool. I think the last thing that I would say is important to also note during the exam is understanding the difference between these platforms, right? It's really going to be important. Like, this is actually this last slide for this, right? So the different platforms that you get access to on Azure to help you monitor environment is these three, right? You've got the advisor, so very important. You need to understand the difference between these two. What the advisor does, it gives you personalized recommendation tools for best practices, right? The focus area, it looks at the cost optimization, reliability. How can you minimize costing in your environment? How can you configure resources better to avoid losing money and stuff like that? It helps you save on money. That's the key thing, right? The other one is your Azure Monitor. Your Azure Monitor basically, Azure Monitor, what it actually does, Azure Monitor is a central monitoring platform that basically collects, let's say, logs, telemetry across the Azure resources and stuff like that, right? So the benefit is an end-to-end visible into your infrastructure. So it really gives you an understanding of your infrastructure overall, right? There's some of the things that it actually has. It's like your key components, your log analytics, alerts and all of that, applications. So it really does have a lot for you to really be at a point where you can understand your environment. The other area that's also very important for you to understand is the service health, right? So service health allows you to see the health of your resources. It provides alerts and guidance when your Azure service and stuff like that actually is maybe not performing as it should. It covers planned maintenance. So if there's any planned maintenance that's going to be happening in Microsoft, so you actually do get access to that information. So it really is concerned about the health of your resources, basically. So that's one thing that I would say. So I think that was probably the last slide for this, right? So for those that want to prepare for the exam, I do have study notes. It's basically me summarizing the information so that, you know, it's easy for you to go through or remember. So if you do want to buy the notes, you can buy them. I think they're about 70 Rand, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so you can actually get the Azure notes. Where you can find them, you can literally go on my YouTube. You can go to my profile. I think in the description, you can get access to my PayHip link, right? There's a store where you can actually purchase this. If you go to my LinkedIn bio on my social media platforms, you'd actually see that there's a store. If you just click on the end of the link, you can actually get this 70 Rand. It's just a summary of the overall information that basically you need to understand, right? If there's no questions, I think this was the last slide. As I've said, our sponsor is Whittle Academy, right? So Whittle Academy is a data and AI academy. So we train people on data and AI skills, people that want to transition into data analytics, data science, AI and stuff like that. So that's really our core focus. And we also provide training to organizations that want to upskill their employees. So if you know any company that wants to be upskilled, we do provide those sort of services, right? Other than that, I'm just going to say I'm just going to give everyone some time to see if anyone has any questions. I'm just checking if anyone has questions before I end the live. Okay, I see there is no questions. I think that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for the participation. I know we don't have a lot of viewers, unfortunately, but hopefully, whoever is going to be writing an exam, this might actually help them. Because most of the resources out there are paid and they're not free. So try to make this as accessible as possible, because this is really important content to help you get started in your career. So please don't forget to like. It does help us, honestly. Just like the video, it should really go a long way so that more people can actually see this content. I think, thank you so much, guys. Like, as I always say, let's get certified. How do I end this live now?